What if the most devastating war in human history was set in motion by a total failure? A drifting nobody, sketching buildings in Vienna, sleeping in homeless shelters, crying in a trench during World War I. But from the ashes of defeat, he rose, and he carried with him a voice that turned pain into purpose, rage into rhetoric, and a broken nation into a weapon. This is the story of how Hitler happened. Welcome to Nutty Histories, where the past isn't just strange, it's terrifyingly real. In today's episode, how a nobody became Hitler. Before he became the Führer, Adolf Hitler was a ghost drifting through the gutters of Imperial Vienna, a city of grandeur and contradiction. It was the early 1900s. Vienna, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and inequality. Here, Freud was revolutionizing psychology, Klimt was redefining art, coffee houses buzzed with intellectuals debating philosophy and politics. But young Adolf Hitler, he wasn't inside any cafe. He was outside, cold, alone, a high school dropout with nothing but a sketchbook and a fading dream. At 18, Hitler moved to Vienna to chase what he believed was his destiny, becoming a famous artist. He applied twice to the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, and both times he was rejected, not because he lacked raw talent, but because his work lacked imagination. The examiners told him he could draw buildings but not people. Worse still, on his second attempt, they told him not to come back. For Hitler, this wasn't just rejection, it was devastation. He had no backup plan, no profession, no future. After the death of his mother, Clara Hitler, whom he adored, he was truly alone. With no friends, no family, and no income, Hitler descended into Vienna's underbelly. He lived in men's hostels and slept in barracks meant for the city's destitute. He sold postcard sketches of Vienna's cathedrals just to eat. He wore the same clothes for weeks. To many, he was just another drifter in a city full of lost men. But in the shadows, something was fermenting. While his artistic ambitions collapsed, Hitler turned to reading obsessively, but not novels or poetry. He devoured nationalist pamphlets, racial science, and conspiracy theories. The kind that blamed Jews, immigrants, and leftists for everything wrong in society. He read the writings of Lanz von Liebenfels, a racist mystic who believed in Aryan superiority and claimed history was a battle between good Aryans and evil non-Aryans. He also admired Karl Lueger, Vienna's populist mayor, who mixed clever oratory with anti-Semitic propaganda. Lueger showed that hatred could win votes, and Hitler took notes. His Vienna years gave Hitler two things: a hatred of the cosmopolitan, multicultural order, and a burning belief that he was meant for something greater. He began to craft a delusional narrative. He hadn't failed because of talent, but because of a corrupt system, because of Jews, because of modernity, because the world didn't understand his genius. He stopped being an artist and started becoming an ideologue. He was invisible, forgettable, but soon, that would all change. In 1914, the world erupted into chaos, and so did Adolf Hitler's life. After years drifting through Vienna as a failed artist, he suddenly found purpose in war. When World War I broke out, Hitler was living in Munich. Within days, he volunteered for the German army, not out of patriotism for Austria, but out of loyalty to Germany. He later called the war the greatest of all experiences. For the first time in his life, Hitler had structure, belonging, a uniform, and, most dangerously, a cause. He served as a messenger on the Western Front, one of the most dangerous roles in the trenches. Under constant shell fire, dodging bullets and gas attacks, Hitler thrived. He won the Iron Cross twice, an honor rarely given to someone of such a low rank. And yet, he was still a loner. Other soldiers found him odd, quiet, and rigid. While they played cards and shared laughs, he read newspapers and painted watercolors. He didn't drink, he didn't flirt, he didn't connect. He fought, but never really belonged. In the war's final days, Hitler was blinded in a British gas attack near Ypres. He spent weeks recovering in a hospital in Pomerania. It was there, lying in darkness, that he received the news that would define his fury forever: Germany had surrendered. To him, it wasn't just defeat, it was betrayal. The country hadn't lost on the battlefield. It had been stabbed in the back by politicians, by revolutionaries, by the Jews. This myth, the stab in the back legend, was a lie. But to Hitler, it was gospel. Germany was in ruins, economically, politically, and psychologically. The Kaiser had abdicated. The monarchy was gone. A fragile new democracy, the Weimar Republic, was trying to steady the ship in a storm. But the people were bitter. Inflation soared. Food was scarce. Armed uprisings from communists and nationalists turned the streets into battlegrounds. Into this vacuum of chaos, Hitler returned, decorated, disillusioned, and seething. In 1919, Hitler was working as a low-level informant for the German army. His job was to spy on small political groups that could pose a threat. One of them was the German Workers' Party, a tiny fringe nationalist group with no real influence. But something happened that surprised everyone, even him. At a meeting, Hitler stood up to challenge a speaker. His speech was so fiery, so intense, that the party's founder approached him after and said, "You have the gift." And he did. What Hitler lacked in charm, he made up for in rage. His speeches weren't polished. They were volcanic. He spoke to people's anger, fear, and pride. He didn't offer facts. He offered someone to blame. His targets were always the same. The Treaty of Versailles, the November criminals who signed it, communists, Jews, democracy itself. By 1920, he had joined the party full-time. Before long, he was shaping it into something new. He helped rebrand the group as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a speaker, and soon that voice would echo far beyond Munich's beer halls. By 1923, Germany had fallen flat on its face. Hyperinflation shattered the economy. A loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Families used wheelbarrows to carry cash that wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Children made kites out of banknotes. People burned money just to stay warm. This wasn't just a crisis. It was humiliation. Germany was teetering on revolution. Left-wing uprisings had already tried and failed to bring Bolshevism to Berlin. But in Bavaria, the real threat was rising from the right. Here, nationalists, monarchists, and anti-Semites gathered like vultures over a dying republic. And one man was about to bet everything on one explosive move. That night, as Bavarian leaders gave speeches, the doors burst open. Adolf Hitler stormed in, pistol raised, flanked by armed stormtroopers. He fired a shot into the ceiling. "This is a national revolution," he shouted. "The government is deposed." In his mind, he was reenacting Mussolini's March on Rome from the year before. A charismatic leader seizing power through sheer force of will. But this wasn't Rome. This was Munich, and things spiraled fast. He thought generals and politicians would rally to his side. Instead, they stalled, lied, escaped. By morning, the plan had unraveled. Still desperate, Hitler led a march through Munich streets with 2,000 supporters, expecting to be met with applause and revolution. Instead, they were met by state police and a wall of rifles. A shootout erupted. 16 Nazis were killed. Hitler dislocated his shoulder, fleeing the scene. He hid in a friend's attic, his revolution in ruins. And then, the twist no one expected. Instead of being crushed by the failed coup, Hitler was catapulted by it. His trial became a platform. In a courtroom packed with reporters, he didn't plead for mercy. He declared himself a patriot. He ranted, he thundered, he blamed Versailles, the Jews, the government, everything but himself. The judges, sympathetic to his nationalist rhetoric, gave him just 5 years in prison. He served 9 months in comfort, and while behind bars, he wrote a book. The book was called Mein Kampf, My Struggle. It was part autobiography, part manifesto, part delusion. In it, Hitler laid out everything he would eventually do. His belief in racial hierarchy, his hatred of Jews, his plan to conquer Eastern Europe, his contempt for democracy. No one took it seriously at the time, but his vision would shape the course of modern history. The failed coup taught him a lesson. You don't seize Germany with bullets, you win it with ballots. He realized power didn't lie in the street, it lay in the system. From now on, the revolution would wear a suit, it would shake hands, run campaigns, make promises, and then, once inside, it would burn the whole thing down. When Hitler walked out of Landsberg prison in 1924, he was no longer a reckless revolutionary. He was a strategist. The failed coup had taught him a brutal lesson. Guns could make noise, but laws held power. And the system he once tried to destroy, he was now going to infiltrate it. The Nazi Party had been banned, its leaders scattered, its reputation in tatters. But Hitler moved fast. He rebranded the movement, not as a band of violent thugs, but as a legitimate political force. He promised order, pride, prosperity, and above all, revenge. It wasn't about brute force anymore. It was about rhetoric, symbolism, and control of the narrative. This was the Weimar Republic, vibrant on the surface, but fracturing underneath. To some, it was a golden age, but to millions of Germans, it was decay. They saw their traditions crumbling, their economy on life support, their national pride in ashes. And Hitler knew exactly who to blame. The Treaty of Versailles, Marxists, modern culture, and above all, the Jews. He wasn't subtle. He didn't need to be, because in hard times, simplicity sells. In 1925, the Nazi Party was relaunched, now with a national structure, local cells, and a ruthless propaganda machine. They printed thousands of leaflets, hosted fiery rallies, turned paranoia into politics. Hitler wasn't the only speaker, but he was the only star. People came out just to hear his voice, his anger, his promises. They didn't just support him, they believed him. Hitler spoke with an intensity Germany hadn't heard before. He whispered, roared, paused for effect. He built tension like a conductor before a crescendo. To the desperate, he sounded like salvation. To the disillusioned, he sounded like truth. To the angry, he sounded like justice. But for all the noise, the Nazis still weren't winning big. In the 1928 elections, they got just 2.6% of the vote. To many, Hitler looked like a loud failure. But behind the scenes, he was building a storm. Expanding networks, recruiting youth, winning over industrialists, planning for the next collapse. The Nazi Party was still fringe, still mocked, still underestimated. But they had the leader, the message, the machine. All they needed was a crisis big enough to tear the Republic apart. And it was coming. The greatest economic crash in modern history was just months away. In October 1929, the world broke. The Wall Street crash was far from just an American disaster. It sent economic shockwaves across the globe. And when they hit Germany, they hit hard. Banks collapsed, businesses folded, millions lost their jobs overnight. By 1932, 6 million Germans were unemployed. Bread lines stretched for blocks. Children starved in one of the most developed nations on earth. And when people go hungry, they get angry. When they get angry, they look for someone to blame. Hitler already had a list. The crash was Hitler's moment, the one he'd been waiting for. He and his party moved fast. They painted democracy as weak, corrupt, and useless in crisis. They claimed only they could restore strength, order, and pride. And in that chaos, their message finally landed. This time, the crowd did more than cheer. They voted. In the 1930 elections, the Nazi Party went from fringe to second largest in the Reichstag. Just like that, they had 107 seats. They were no longer a joke, they were a threat. And Hitler, he was no longer a failed revolutionary. He was now a statesman, a player, a man with a voice in Germany's future, and the ambition to control it completely. Politics is one thing, But this was marketing on steroids. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda spin doctor, turned the Nazi Party into a brand. They used mass rallies, cinematic imagery, clever slogans, and emotion-first messaging to turn despair into devotion. They made politics feel like purpose. The Nazis didn't offer policies, they offered identity. While the Republic tore itself apart between far-left communists and far-right fascists, Hitler posed as the middle way. He said, "Only we can stop the chaos." He didn't have to take power by force this time. He just had to look like the only adult in a room full of arsonists. Fear made him look reasonable. And the more the country burned, the more the people turned to the man holding the extinguisher, even if he'd lit the fire. In the 1932 presidential election, Hitler ran against the aging war hero Paul von Hindenburg. Hitler lost, but not by much. Nevertheless, the Nazis weren't done. In the Reichstag elections later that year, they surged again, this time becoming the largest party with 230 seats, still without a majority, but they had leverage. And Hitler? He wouldn't settle for second place, not anymore. The elites thought they could use Hitler, make him chancellor, then control him from behind the scenes. They believed he was popular, but pliable, dangerous, but containable. They were wrong on every count. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. The serpent was now in the palace. February 27th, 1933, the Reichstag, Germany's parliament building, goes up in flames. Within hours, the Nazis declare it an attack on the German people. Within days, they've used it to set the Constitution on fire too. A Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe was found at the scene. The Nazis claimed it was proof. The communists were plotting a revolution. Many historians now believe the Nazis set the fire themselves, or at the very least exploited it. But the truth didn't matter. Only fear did. The day after the fire, President Hindenburg, under Hitler's advice, signed the Reichstag fire decree. It suspended all civil liberties. No freedom of speech, no freedom of the press, no right to assemble, no need for warrants, no protection from arbitrary arrest. Hitler called it temporary. Spoiler, it wasn't. Germany was no longer a democracy, not in practice, not in spirit, and the people terrified, silenced, powerless. Hitler still wanted legitimacy. So, he called for new elections in March 1933, hoping to win an outright majority. Even with all the fear, even with the intimidation, the Nazis still only secured 44% of the vote. But it was enough. With conservative allies, Hitler cobbled together a majority. Now, he could go for the real prize. Total control. On March 23, 1933, Hitler proposed the Enabling Act, a law that would let his cabinet pass laws without the Reichstag, laws that could override the Constitution. Essentially, it would make him a legal dictator. Most parties had already been banned or neutralized, but Hitler needed 2/3 of the vote. So what did he do? He made promises to the moderates and threats to the rest. Stormtroopers stood outside the vote hall in full uniform. A silent message: say yes or else. The law passed, 441 to 84. Only the Social Democrats stood against it. The Enabling Act was now law. Hitler didn't need elections anymore, didn't need debate, didn't need the Reichstag at all. Germany was his. To the outside world, it still looked like Germany had a government. But behind the curtains, Hitler had all the levers. The judiciary compromised. The press gagged. Opposition arrested. Dissent dangerous. Germany hadn't slipped into a dictatorship. It had sprinted. And the terrifying part? It was done legally. The Nazi regime had learned a brutal truth. You don't always need to destroy a system to conquer it. Sometimes you just use it better than your enemies ever did. By mid-1933, Hitler had the power, but that didn't mean safety, not to a man like him. He didn't want influence. He wanted absolute control, total, irreversible, godlike control. So, he did what dictators do best. He erased the opposition. After the Enabling Act, the Nazis moved fast. March in 1933. Communist Party banned. June 1933. Social Democrats outlawed. July 1933. All other parties banned. The new law read simply, the National Socialist German Workers' Party is the only political party in Germany. There would be no more elections, no debates, no rivals, only the party, and it answered to one man. Hitler's vision wasn't just political, it was totalitarian. That meant every school taught Nazi ideology, every youth joined the Hitler Youth, every worker joined a Nazi union, every church faced pressure to conform or face consequences. Even leisure was politicized. Through the Strength Through Joy program, the Nazis offered cheap holidays, concerts, even cruises. But everything had a catch. Enjoyment was permitted so long as you obeyed. Trade unions? Gone. Strikes? Illegal. Wages? Frozen. In their place, the German Labor Front, a Nazi-controlled organization that dictated every aspect of employment. It was branded as unity, the end of class division. In truth, it was forced compliance. The workers were owned. But Hitler's thirst for power wasn't satisfied yet, because even within the Nazi Party, there were threats. Chief among them, Ernst Röhm, leader of the SA, Sturmabteilung. The SA were Hitler's old stormtroopers. Street fighters, thugs, the muscle that helped him rise. But by 1934, they'd grown to over 2 million men, far outnumbering the German army. Röhm wanted more, a second revolution, one that would give him a share of true power. Hitler couldn't risk it. So, on the night of June 30th, 1934, he struck. Over the course of just a few days, the SS, Hitler's elite guard, executed Röhm and hundreds of perceived threats. The purge became known as the Night of the Long Knives. The German army, once wary of Hitler, watched the purge with morbid respect. He'd crushed his own allies without flinching. And so, in return for promises to restore military glory, they pledged allegiance, not to Germany, but to Adolf Hitler, personally. Every officer swore a sacred oath. I swear obedience to Adolf Hitler, the Führer of the German Reich and people. Loyalty to the state was dead. Loyalty to the man had begun. In August 1934, President Hindenburg died. Within hours, Hitler announced the merging of the chancellorship and presidency into one title, Führer. The army saluted. The public, weary or bewitched, applauded. And just like that, democracy's corpse was laid to rest. No more checks, no more balances. Only a man with a vision, a voice, and the power to shape the world around him in his image. Hitler's Germany presented itself as unified, prosperous, reborn. But beneath the fanfare and flags, fear still ruled. Neighbors reported neighbors. Books were banned. Jokes were dangerous. And the penalty for dissent? Disappearance. Dictatorships don't just seize the present, they hijack the future. And Hitler knew, if you want to build a Reich that lasts 1,000 years, you don't just conquer land, you conquer minds. From the moment a child could speak, they were taught to chant, Hitler is Germany, Germany is Hitler.
Hitler aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist. Hitler, Sieg! Sieg!
School curricula was rewritten overnight. History books praised Germanic supremacy and framed World War I as a betrayal by Jews and traitors. Biology taught racial science, dividing humanity into pure and impure. Math became, if one mentally ill patient costs the state 12 marks a day, how much do 5 cost in a year? Children weren't re-educated, they were re-engineered.
Adolf Hitler ist unser Retter, unser Held, der edelste Führer auf der ganzen Welt. Für Hitler leben wir und wir sterben gerne wir. Für den Führer bis zum Tod, denn er ist unser Gott.
In 1933, membership in the Hitler Youth was encouraged. By 1936, it was mandatory. At first glance, it looked like any scouting group: camping, exercise, uniforms. But every activity had a message. Endurance meant readiness for war. Group chants became mental conditioning. Games were war simulations in disguise. Boys were trained to become obedient soldiers. Girls joined the League of German Girls, where they were taught their purpose: to be fit mothers of strong Aryan children. Love for the Führer replaced love for parents. Your family didn't raise you now, the state did. The Nazis turned society into a web of informants. Children were encouraged to report their parents for disloyalty. In some homes, mothers whispered lullabies with one eye on the door. In others, fathers lowered their voices in fear that their child might betray them in class the next day. The Hitler Youth Oath summed it up. We are born to die for Germany and Adolf Hitler. Beyond propaganda, this was a blueprint for generational obedience. Religion, too, became part of the system. Faith didn't die, it was merely rebranded. The Nazis attempted to create a new German Christianity, one where Jesus wasn't a Jew, but an Aryan warrior. Crosses were replaced with swastikas. Sunday school replaced with Nazi doctrine. Some pastors resisted, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was later executed for treason. But many churches compromised, fearing destruction or erasure. The message was clear: you could believe in God, so long as Hitler came first. Truth became a luxury. Only state-approved literature, music, and art were allowed. Books by Jewish, pacifist, or liberal authors were banned, then burned in public ceremonies. Radio ownership skyrocketed, but every set was locked to Nazi stations. Even jazz was labeled degenerate because of its African-American roots. Films portrayed Hitler as a messiah and Jews as disease. The line between information and indoctrination erased. What did people really believe? That's harder to know. Many were swept up in the pride and unity. Others kept their heads down, too scared to speak. In Nazi Germany, silence wasn't neutrality, it was compliance. And for a terrifying number, it was enough. This was Hitler's masterstroke. Don't just rule by fear, rule by love. Make them want you, need you, worship you. From cradle to grave, this was no accident. This was programming. Before the world heard the roar of panzer tanks, before bombs fell from the skies, the war had already begun, quietly, cleverly, in the shadows. And Hitler was moving faster than anyone realized. After World War I, Germany was forbidden from having a large army, an air force, or submarines. The Treaty of Versailles made it law. But laws mean nothing to those who don't fear the consequences. Hitler began rearming Germany in secret just weeks after taking power. Old factories were repurposed as civilian sites, secretly building tanks and warplanes. The Luftwaffe, Germany's future air force, was trained under the cover of glider clubs. The military grew from 100,000 men to over 500,000, in direct violation of every treaty Germany had signed. And the Allies? They sent strongly worded letters, but did nothing. The Rhineland was Germany's industrial heart, and according to the treaty, it had to remain unarmed. But in 1936, Hitler rolled the dice. He sent troops marching into the Rhineland, testing how far the world would let him go. His own generals begged him not to. They feared total war if France reacted. But France didn't react. Neither did Britain. And with that silence, Hitler heard permission. Behind the scenes, a terrifying alliance was forming. Germany found a partner in Italy, ruled by Benito Mussolini, a fellow fascist with imperial dreams. Japan, already expanding brutally into China, also aligned with Hitler. They shared a love of military dominance and racial hierarchy. In 1936, these powers signed the Anti-Comintern Pact, a vague agreement to fight communism. But in reality, it was a handshake that said, "You take Asia, I'll take Europe." Hitler always claimed that all Germans should be under one flag. Austria, he argued, wasn't a separate country. It was part of the fatherland. So, in March 1938, without firing a single bullet, German troops marched into Austria. The people, many terrified, some brainwashed, welcomed them. The annexation was approved days later by a staged referendum. 99.7% said yes. The world watched and still did nothing. Western democracies were exhausted from World War I. They feared another war more than they feared Hitler. So when he demanded the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, the leaders of Britain and France offered him a deal. Take the land, but promise to stop. Hitler promised, then immediately broke that promise. This policy of appeasement wasn't peacekeeping. It was fuel to a fire. As the army grew, so did the lies. Hitler's propaganda machine told Germans they were surrounded by enemies. Jews, communists, and foreigners were blamed for everything from unemployment to war. Even the idea of Lebensraum, living space for the German people, justified invasion as a kind of birthright. The rest of the world didn't ignore the coming storm. It believed the calm was real.
Another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
By the end of 1938, Germany had rearmed beyond Versailles limits. Austria was gone. Czechoslovakia was gutted. Alliances were locked in. A generation of German youth had been militarized and radicalized, and no one had stopped him. Hitler was 5 moves in, and still no one said check. One was a fascist obsessed with race, the other a communist obsessed with class. They hated each other, ideologically, politically, viscerally, but power doesn't care about principles. And in August 1939, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin made a deal that would shock the world and lead to the death of millions. Germany and the Soviet Union were supposed to be opposites. Hitler called communism a Jewish conspiracy and vowed to wipe it out. Stalin saw fascism as the ultimate capitalist monster. But Hitler was planning to invade Poland, and he needed to make sure the Soviets wouldn't stop him. Stalin? He didn't trust the West either, and he wanted time to build up his army, so they struck a deal. On August 23, 1939, the world was told, Germany and the USSR have signed a non-aggression pact. Translation? We won't fight each other. But in a secret protocol, they agreed to divide Eastern Europe between them. Poland would be sliced in two. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania would fall into Soviet hands. Hitler could invade from the west, Stalin from the east, and no one would come to stop it. The world didn't know it, but the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact meant that war was now guaranteed. Why would Stalin trust Hitler? He didn't, but he believed this. A war between Germany and the West would weaken both. The Red Army had been badly purged. Stalin had executed or imprisoned thousands of his own officers in the 1930s. He needed time and land to build up for the real fight he knew was coming. Let Hitler start the fire. Stalin would soon be ready. Just 1 week after signing the pact, on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, tore through Polish defenses. Bombers screamed over cities. Soldiers rolled in on tanks. The world watched in horror. Then on September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. Poland was being ripped in half, just as the secret deal had planned.
Consequently, this country is at war with Germany.
Britain and France had guaranteed Poland's independence. So on September 3rd, they finally declared war on Germany. But they didn't act. They didn't bomb Berlin. They didn't mobilize fast enough. For this, it was called the phony war. But for Poland, there was nothing phony about it. Cities were flattened, millions fled, thousands were murdered. By October, Poland was gone. In public, the Nazis and Soviets pretended everything was fine. They even held joint military parades in occupied towns. But both sides knew this wasn't peace, it was a pause. Hitler had no intention of honoring the pact forever. He called Slavs subhuman and wanted their land for German settlers. And Stalin? He was already preparing for betrayal. He just didn't know when it would come. By the end of 1939, Hitler had conquered Poland. Stalin had taken half of Eastern Europe. Britain and France were officially at war with Germany, but had yet to fire a meaningful shot. The Nazi war machine was rolling, and the worst was still to come. That's it for today's episode of Nutty Histories. If you learned something new, be sure to like the video and drop a comment with a historical event you'd like us to explore next. Don't forget to subscribe, or you'll become a part of history yourself. Thanks for watching Nutty Histories. Stay tuned for more insane history coming your way.